It was supposed to be a simple trip to the store, the kind we've all made 100 times. A stop at a nearby 7-Eleven, maybe to grab a snack or a soda, and be on your way. But on August 26, 2020, in the middle of a hot Las Vegas afternoon, that quick errand turned into a moment of irreversible tragedy. One that would leave a man dead, a family shattered, and a city asking how such a small disagreement could turn so deadly. Thomas Martin was 56 years old, a father, a friend, and like so many others that year, just trying to get to the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. We may not know exactly what brought him to that 7-Eleven store that day, but what we do know is that he never made it back home. And what led to that was a confrontation that unfolded in mere minutes over something as routine as where to stand in line. COVID-19 had changed the rules of everyday life. Social distancing, mask mandates, and limits on how many people could enter a store, they were part of our new normal. For many, it brought anxiety and pressure. For store workers and security personnel, it brought an entirely new kind of responsibility, enforcing rules that not everyone agreed with. That pressure collided head-on with emotion, frustration, and fear, and Thomas was caught right in the middle. The security guard on duty that day was Kejia Mitchell. She had been hired to enforce those pandemic protocols, to make sure the number of people in the store didn't exceed the limit. But she wasn't just checking the door. She was armed with a loaded gun, a weapon she carried while doing a job that had never been meant to involve deadly force. And on that day, that decision would change her life, too. What began as a disagreement about the line, a moment many witnesses described as tense but avoidable, quickly spiraled into something far more violent. Thomas, upset that he'd been told to wait, reportedly argued with Mitchell. Words were exchanged. Things escalated. And in the blink of an eye, the argument left the doorway and spilled outside, with fatal consequences. Kejia Mitchell pulled out her gun, and as Thomas turned to walk away, that gun was fired. Thomas was shot in the chest, just steps from the entrance. By the time first responders arrived, he was unresponsive. Within moments, a simple store visit had become a crime scene. A man was gone, and two families were about to face the weight of a tragedy that could never be undone. This isn't just a story of a man who lost his life or a guard who pulled the trigger. It's a painful reflection of the fear, pressure, and tension that so many people carried during the pandemic, and how, in a moment of panic, things can go horribly wrong. In this video, we explore the full story of what happened to Thomas Martin, why it happened, and what it reveals about the systems, the choices, and the lives caught in between. The year was 2020, and life everywhere felt uncertain. The COVID-19 pandemic had redefined what normal looked like. Across the world, people adjusted to mask mandates, social distancing, and the constant hum of anxiety. Essential workers stepped into unfamiliar roles, and everyday errands carried an unexpected weight. In stores, signs told us where to stand. Arrows pointed us in a safe direction. Everyone was trying to do the best they could with a situation that felt out of control. In Las Vegas, Nevada, businesses like 7-Eleven were doing their part to follow the rules. Customers were asked to line up outside and wait for their turn to enter. No crowding, no exceptions. These were the kind of protocols meant to keep people safe. But for those tasked with enforcing them, they could also lead to high-pressure moments with strangers who didn't want to comply. To help with enforcement, some stores hired private security. One of those people was 38-year-old Kejia Mitchell. She wasn't a police officer or a trained crisis responder. She had recently completed an 8-hour security course and was working at the 7-Eleven store where Thomas Martin would eventually arrive. But on that day, she wasn't just wearing a uniform. She was carrying a firearm. It's important to understand that Mitchell had failed a firearm safety test just weeks before the incident, yet she was still permitted to work as an armed guard. According to reports, the handgun had been a gift from her husband, not something she was required to carry for her job. And still, there she was, standing outside that store, holding the power to end someone's life in her waistband. On August 26th, Thomas Martin showed up at the 7-Eleven. We don't know what kind of day he was having, but witnesses say he walked up and entered the store, skipping the short line outside. To some, it might have seemed like a small misstep, one made out of haste or habit or even confusion. But in the tense climate of pandemic rules and rigid enforcement, that simple action set off a tragic chain of events. Mitchell confronted Thomas and told him to wait outside like everyone else. Reports say Thomas became irritated. He didn't understand why he was being singled out. What began as an exchange of words quickly escalated into something more personal, more heated. The atmosphere outside the store changed. People in the area began to sense that something wasn't right. In moments like these, it's often hard to draw the line between firm enforcement and dangerous escalation. What was meant to be a job rooted in public health, controlling the number of people inside a store, had turned into a power struggle. One person was trying to go about his day. The other, tasked with authority, was not properly trained to manage the tension that followed. And in that gap between intention and reaction, everything fell apart. It all unfolded in a matter of minutes. After Thomas Martin was asked to leave the store, the exchange between him and Kejia Mitchell began to escalate. Witnesses later described the moment as charged. Not just misunderstanding, but something more intense. Words were exchanged. Thomas, frustrated at being told to wait outside, pushed back verbally. He felt disrespected. She felt challenged. It was a kind of public tension that draws silent attention, but few step in to defuse. As the situation grew heated, Mitchell stepped forward and physically blocked Thomas from re-entering. According to prosecutors, she placed her hand on his shirt, a move that signaled a shift from verbal to physical control. That single action took things to another level. It was no longer just about enforcing store policy. Now it was about confrontation and control, and emotions on both sides began to rise. Then came the moment that changed everything. Mitchell reached for the gun she had brought with her, a loaded weapon she wasn't required to carry and wasn't properly certified to use. As tensions peaked, she pulled the firearm from her waistband and raised it. According to court testimony, she held the gun near Thomas's face. The sight of the weapon created panic and the fear that something irreversible was about to happen. Thomas reacted in the way many would, startled, defensive, trying to de-escalate. Witnesses say he raised his hand, possibly trying to push the weapon away or back off. It looked like he was trying to end the conflict, not escalate it. But by then, things had moved too far. Mitchell followed him as he backed away. She didn't put the weapon down. She didn't walk away. And then, as he turned, she pulled the trigger.
A judge sent a security guard who shot and killed a man to prison. Thanks for joining us at 5. I'm Denise Valdez.
I'm David Charnes. This is a story the 8 News Now investigators have followed right from the beginning, first obtaining video, which then became part of the case file.
Our Vanessa Murphy in court during today's tense moments, and we do want to warn you, the video in this report is of a sensitive nature.
Judge Tiara Jones sentencing Kejia Mitchell to 5.5 to 14 years in prison for shooting and killing a man while she was working as a security guard. Judge Jones acknowledging this is a difficult case which dates back to the COVID-19 pandemic, but she points to video and the need to protect the public.
It's not what took place in the store that's the biggest issue. It's what took place outside of the store that's the biggest issue.
This video shows the moments leading up to Kejia Mitchell shooting and killing Thomas Martin outside a 7-Eleven in August of 2020. Tensions escalate at this Northeast neighborhood convenience store in less than 2 minutes. Mitchell limiting customers due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Martin, frustrated, barges in. Mitchell pulls out a gun. She and another employee remove Martin. She continues to point the gun at him. He slaps it away. The confrontation continues. Mitchell shoots Martin in the chest in front of his longtime partner.
He died in my arm. And then she continued to threaten me and tell me to get off of 7-Eleven property.
Prosecutors and Mitchell's defense team give 2 different versions of what happened.
I was asking myself, why was there even an arrest?
Her attorneys point to Martin's toxicology results showing he had methamphetamine in his system.
You would think that once outside the store, he would think maybe now refused to be confrontational.
Prosecutors say Mitchell shouldn't have pulled out a gun, and they point to this.
Ain't no stop you hit me with a bottle.
First exposed by the 8 News Now investigators, showing Mitchell's interaction with a woman in the store parking lot.
We learn about another video, an uncharged act from 19 days before, where we watch Miss Mitchell treating another customer like an animal.
Mitchell's attorneys ask for probation after she entered an Alford plea where she doesn't admit guilt but believes there may be enough evidence to convict her. That took a murder charge off the table in exchange for 2 felonies, including voluntary manslaughter.
I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart.
Martin's partner saying in court she and his friends will be at Mitchell's parole hearings where she wants to hear her tell the truth. Reporting in downtown Las Vegas, Vanessa Murphy, 8 News Now.
Martin's partner also calling the Alford plea an insult since Mitchell is not admitting guilt.
The sound of the gunshot shattered the tension outside that store. Just steps from the front door, Thomas Martin collapsed. The bullet had struck him in the chest. Witnesses screamed. Some ran for help. Others stood frozen, struggling to understand what had just happened. One moment, it was a disagreement about waiting in line. The next, a man was lying on the pavement, unresponsive. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. Thomas was pronounced dead at the scene. The man who had only come by something from a convenience store, who had no weapon, who posed no threat that justified deadly force, was gone. And in that moment, the weight of Mitchell's decision came crashing down. Mitchell was taken into custody. The footage, the eyewitnesses, the weapon, all pointed to a confrontation that never needed to happen. What could have ended with a conversation, a warning, or even a call to police, ended instead with a life lost on the sidewalk. And while the facts would be debated in court, the heart of the story was heartbreakingly simple. A deadly choice made in a moment of fear and authority gone too far. When prosecutors began building their case against Keisha Mitchell, they relied heavily on a combination of surveillance footage, eyewitness testimony, and the physical evidence collected at the scene. The story the footage told was clear and chilling. It captured the interaction between Mitchell and Thomas Martin from start to finish, leaving little to interpretation. For the prosecution, it wasn't just a question of what happened. It was a matter of accountability. Who escalated the situation and why? In the video, prosecutors pointed to a key moment. Mitchell reaching out to grab Thomas by the shirt. That physical contact, they argued, wasn't just unprofessional. It was unnecessary. Thomas wasn't lunging. He wasn't threatening her life. He was upset, yes, but the footage showed a man trying to walk away, not a man trying to attack. That distinction mattered deeply in court, especially when force, and especially deadly force, was on trial. The most damning part of the footage came seconds later, when Mitchell drew her gun. It wasn't a defensive reaction. It wasn't a response to an armed threat. Prosecutors described how she pulled the weapon from her waistband and held it near Thomas's face. Not down at her side, not pointed at the ground. It was an aggressive posture, one that changed the entire dynamic of the encounter. The gun, they said, didn't calm the situation. It created terror. Chief Deputy District Attorney Shannon Clowers made the state's position clear. She pulls out a loaded gun, and she puts it to the side of his face. That wasn't protocol. That wasn't necessary. And when Thomas instinctively tried to move the gun or back away, Mitchell followed him instead of de-escalating. When she fired, it wasn't a last resort. It was a moment of fatal overreach. What made the case even more disturbing for the prosecution was Mitchell's lack of proper training. They revealed that she had recently failed a weapons safety exam, and that she wasn't required to carry a gun for her job at all. In their eyes, Mitchell wasn't just a poorly prepared guard. She was someone who had armed herself and used that weapon in a way that completely disregarded the value of human life. The DA's office emphasized that enforcing pandemic protocols never gave Mitchell the legal right to use lethal force. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't self-defense in the traditional sense. Thomas Martin, they said, was an unarmed man who was shot while turning away. And for that reason, the original charge against Mitchell was second-degree murder, because In their words, she chose to shoot when she had countless other options. In the end, the prosecution's message was direct but heartbreaking. A man is dead over a line at a convenience store. And that didn't have to happen. They asked the court and the public to see the tragedy not just in what was lost, but in how preventable it truly was. Thomas Martin's life mattered. And their job, they said, was to speak for him now and make sure this kind of failure doesn't happen again. While the prosecution painted a picture of recklessness and unnecessary violence, the defense came to court with a very different story, one rooted in fear, pressure, and a woman who they claimed found herself in over her head. From their perspective, lled Mitchell didn't wake up that morning planning to hurt anyone. She was doing a difficult job in a difficult time, and she reacted out of instinct, not malice. Her defense team acknowledged that the situation escalated, but they stressed that it was Mitchell who felt threatened first. According to her lawyers, Thomas Martin's tone and body language alarmed her. He was angry, she said. He shouted, and when she tried to block his re-entry, things became physical. In her mind, she wasn't just enforcing policy. She was defending herself against someone who had become hostile. They describe her reaction as fight or flight, triggered by fear and confusion. Mitchell, they said, wasn't trained for de-escalation. She hadn't been properly equipped for the emotional toll of enforcing health protocols during a global pandemic. She was placed in a position of authority, handed a loaded gun, and left to manage confrontations without the tools most law enforcement officers are given. And that, they argued, was a failure not just on her part, but of the system around her. The defense also pointed to the chaotic atmosphere of 2020. Everyone was on edge. Fights over masks, social distancing, and access to stores had become tragically common across the country. Mitchell had already witnessed a number of aggressive encounters during her short time on the job. Her team argued that she didn't view Thomas Martin as a man simply cutting in line. She saw a possible threat, one that made her feel unsafe. They also revealed that the handgun Mitchell carried had been given to her by her husband, a personal weapon, not one issued by her employer. She was not required to carry it, but she did so believe it would protect her. The defense acknowledged that she had failed a firearm safety test, but argued that she didn't intend to kill anyone. In their eyes, she made a tragic mistake, one driven by panic, not premeditation. In an emotional statement, Mitchell herself expressed deep remorse. Through tears, she said, "I didn't mean to take this man's life. I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart." It was a moment of raw humanity, one that reminded everyone in the courtroom that this case wasn't about a cold-hearted killer, but a woman who made a life-altering decision in a moment she couldn't take back. Ultimately, these arguments led Mitchell to enter an Alford plea, a rare legal move where she didn't admit guilt but acknowledged that the evidence would likely lead to conviction. It was a defense's way of accepting responsibility while maintaining that this was never murder in the traditional sense. Their goal wasn't to excuse what happened, but to explain it, and urged the court to see Mitchell not as a monster, but as a human being who failed under pressure with tragic consequences. After months of investigation and legal proceedings, the case against lled Mitchell moved toward resolution. The courtroom had heard powerful testimony from both sides, prosecutors detailing the fatal choices she made, and the defense trying to explain the fear that shaped her actions. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, and yet the emotional complexity of the case called for a different kind of legal outcome. It wasn't black and white. It was human. Rather than go through a full jury trial, Mitchell made a significant legal decision. She entered what's known as an Alford plea. This type of plea allowed her to maintain her claim that she never intended to kill Thomas Martin, but also meant she accepted that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict her. It was a compromise that reflected the tragic gray area of the case. She wasn't admitting guilt in the traditional sense, but she was accepting responsibility in the eyes of the law. As part of the plea agreement, the original second-degree murder charge was reduced. Instead, Mitchell pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and assault with a deadly weapon. These were still serious charges, and they carried real consequences. But they also acknowledged the unique and complex circumstances under which the shooting occurred. The court recognized that this wasn't a planned act of violence, but a terrible and avoidable overreaction. On July 10th, 2025, Mitchell stood in court for sentencing. The judge handed down a prison term of 5 to 14 years, a sentence that would reflect both the gravity of taking a life and the belief that she was not beyond redemption. For Thomas Martin's loved ones, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice, in some form, had been served, but no sentence would bring him back or erase the pain that lingered. In the courtroom, Mitchell spoke directly to the family of Thomas Martin. Her voice was shaky, and her words were heavy with regret. "I never meant to harm anyone. I didn't wake up that morning intending to take a life. I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart." The room was silent. It was a moment of sorrow, but also of humility, one that reminded everyone that accountability and remorse can live side by side. The judge, while delivering the sentence, acknowledged the devastating nature of the case. He spoke about the deep consequences of poor training, of arming someone who wasn't prepared, and of the irreversible price of fear-based decisions. He also pointed out that while justice had to be served, the greater lesson was in how we choose or fail to prepare people for positions of authority and responsibility. With sentencing complete, Keija Mitchell was taken into custody to begin her prison term. The courtroom slowly emptied. The headlines would soon fade. But for two families, the day would be etched in memory forever. One family grieved the loss of a son and father. The other mourned the downfall of a woman whose life would never be the same. The law had spoken, but the deeper tragedy was something no verdict could fully resolve. In the days following Thomas Martin's death, the ripple effect of the tragedy spread far beyond the 7-Eleven parking lot. His family was left devastated. A son had lost his father. Siblings lost a brother. Friends lost someone who had simply gone out for a routine errand and never came back. There were no goodbyes, no final words, just a crushing silence that follows sudden, senseless loss. The kind of silence that lingers in homes, at dinner tables, in memories that used to feel safe. Thomas's loved one spoke out not just in grief, but with purpose. His son shared a heartfelt message online after Mitchell was sentenced, saying, "We got justice for you, Dad." It wasn't said in celebration. It was said in mourning. The pain in those words was clear. They didn't want justice in the first place. They wanted their father. Their family was not looking for revenge, only truth, and the hope that no one else would suffer the same kind of loss. For those who knew Thomas, the tragedy didn't define him. He was remembered as warm, grounded, and full of life. People who encountered him said he had a kind soul and a good heart. The fact that his final moments were filled with conflict and fear stood in heartbreaking contrast to the man he was in life. His memory became a symbol not of the incident itself, but how quickly normal moments can turn tragic when fear overrides compassion. And on the other side, Keija Mitchell's life was forever changed too. In court, she wept. She apologized. She accepted her sentence. But the emotional toll, the knowledge that she had taken a life, would stay with her long after her prison time ended. Her family watched as someone they loved went from a job meant to provide safety to a role in a public tragedy. They, too, grieved, not only for Thomas, but for the version of Mitchell that no longer existed. The community in Las Vegas was also shaken. People began asking bigger questions, not just about the shooting, but about what led up to it. Why was an undertrained security guard armed with a gun? Why are civilians being asked to enforce pandemic rules without the tools or support they need? It wasn't just one bad decision. It was a chain of failures that ultimately cost a man his life. The city mourned and also questioned. This case became a sobering reminder of how high the stakes can be when fear, authority, and poor preparation collide. It wasn't about heroes and villains. It was about the fragility of human judgment under stress, and how one bad moment can carry permanent consequences. It was a lesson in accountability, but also in empathy. Both families suffered. Both lives were altered. The pain was mutual, even if the outcomes were not. In the end, Thomas Martin's story became more than a headline. It became a call for change in training, in hiring practices, in how we define responsibility. And above all, it became a reminder to slow down, to lead with patience, and to remember that behind every rule and policy is a human being just trying to get through the day. That one moment of understanding, or lack of it, can mean everything. The tragic death of Thomas Martin didn't just highlight one person's mistake. It exposed a deeper issue that many communities across the country are still reckoning with. It showed us what can happen when we place serious responsibilities into the hands of people who haven't been properly trained, and how systems meant to protect can sometimes create even more harm. It was about more than a single shooting. It was about the cracks in the system that left both a man dead and a woman behind bars. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, we asked a lot of essential workers. We asked grocery clerks, gas station employees, and security guards to manage tension, enforce health mandates, and control public frustration, all without the emotional support, crisis training, or legal clarity to do so safely. The pandemic didn't just bring a virus. It brought fear, distrust, and frayed tempers. And too often, the weight of that burden fell on those least equipped to carry it. Kejia Mitchell's case forced many to question how we define authority and where we draw the line between safety and overreach. If someone is hired to protect a space, what kind of training should they receive? What kind of emotional intelligence is needed? And should anyone, especially someone who failed basic firearm safety, be allowed to carry a loaded weapon while managing public conflict? These questions don't go away just because the case is closed. There's also a powerful conversation here about race, class, and perception. Thomas Martin was a black man, unarmed, frustrated, but not violent. The justice system in this case worked its course, but the initial assumptions and fear that led to the gun being drawn can't be ignored. This tragedy, like many others, forces us to examine how quickly black men are perceived as threats. Even in everyday spaces like convenience stores, even when they pose no danger at all. For many, the story of Thomas Martin became a symbol of what happens when compassion is replaced by confrontation. It showed us how fragile life can be, how a moment of panic can destroy two lives in the span of seconds. And it asked a sobering question: what could have happened if someone had stepped in to calm things down? If more patience had been shown? If Thomas had been given the benefit of the doubt? Beyond the courtroom and the news headlines, this case leaves behind a human truth we can't afford to forget. Policies can change, laws can adjust, but lives, once taken, cannot be returned. True justice goes beyond sentencing. It's about changing the conditions that made the tragedy possible in the first place. It's about learning, listening, and ensuring no family has to face this kind of heartbreak again. So as we remember Thomas Martin and acknowledge the life-altering consequences for Kejia Mitchell, we must also look inward. We must ask how we treat each other under pressure, how we train those we place in power, and how we protect both justice and humanity in moments of conflict. Because sometimes, it's not just about who is right or wrong. It's about how we choose to respond, and who pays the price when we get wrong. As we close a chapter on this deeply painful story, we're left with a heavy but necessary truth. One man is dead, and another life has been forever changed, not because of grand crime or deliberate hate, but because of a single moment that spiraled out of control. The death of Thomas Martin wasn't just tragic. It was preventable, and that's what makes it so hard to accept. A trip to the store should never end in a funeral. A disagreement over a line should never cost someone their life. But in a world already fraying under the weight of fear and uncertainty, one misunderstanding turned fatal. It wasn't just about COVID rules. It wasn't just about protocol. It was about what happens when fear, frustration, and poor judgment collide. This wasn't the story of a violent criminal versus a brave protector. It was a story of two people, both human, both flawed, both caught in a moment neither could take back. And that makes the pain even more real. Because if this could happen to Thomas Martin, it could happen to anyone. It could happen to your father, your brother, your friend. And if we're honest, many of us saw versions of this tension play out during the pandemic. Tempers flared in grocery stores, security guards were yelled at, customers were removed, and sometimes even fights broke out, all over policies no one fully understood or agreed with. The difference here? A loaded gun was in the mix, and someone paid the ultimate price for it. So what do we take away from all this? For one, training matters. The people we put in positions of power, even seemingly small roles like store security, need more than a uniform. They need preparation. They need support. They need the tools to respond with clarity, not panic. A weapon doesn't make someone capable. Compassion, patience, and proper training do. Secondly, We have to think about the value we place on human life in moments of conflict. Thomas Martin didn't need to die that day. No one needed to pull a gun. What was missing wasn't just control, it was grace. The kind of grace that says, this person is frustrated. Let me take a breath before I escalate. We all have the ability to pause, to listen, and to lead with empathy, but only if we choose to. As viewers, as community members, and as fellow human beings, we are each a part of the environments we create. We can push for better standards, safer policies, and greater accountability in the systems around us. And just as importantly, we can push ourselves to be slower to judge, quicker to de-escalate, and always aware that behind every conflict is a real person with life, a story, and people who love them. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Bring it into your schools, your workplaces, your community meetings. Advocate for better training standards for security personnel. Challenge your leaders to do better. And most of all, carry this story in your heart as a reminder to act with care, especially in the moments that test us the most. Thomas Martin deserved more than the way his life ended. His family deserved more than the silence that followed. Let his story be more than a case file or a headline. Let it be a call to awareness, a plea for change, and a reminder that we all have the power and the responsibility to stop preventable tragedies before they happen. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider leaving a comment, sharing your thoughts, and subscribing for more deep dives into real stories that matter. Let's keep the conversation going, and let's work together to create a world where every life is treated with the dignity and protection it deserves.